It was one of those nights when sleep felt miles away, and the house had fallen into that deep, heavy silence that only came past midnight. The kind of silence where even the ticking clock sounded too loud. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, my fingers tracing lacy circles on the old, worn-out blanket I'd had since I was a kid. It smelled faintly of lavender and old books, a weird but oddly comforting mix. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the street lamp outside. Shadows crawled lazily across the walls as the breeze swayed the curtains. I sighed, flipping over to my side, hoping that maybe, just maybe, changing positions would trick my brain into shutting off. But it didn't. That's when I noticed it. The edge of the blanket felt different, thicker, like it had layers it didn't have before. I sat up, heart thudding, not out of fear, but out of that strange, childlike curiosity you feel when something's just off. I pulled the blanket towards me, running my hands along the seams, and that's when my fingers caught something cold and metallic sewn into the fabric. "What the?" I muttered, tugging gently. A tiny silver button popped out from between the stitches, almost glowing under the soft light. I swear I'd never seen it before. Not in all the years I dragged this blanket through sleepovers, camping trips, and lazy Sundays. Against all logic, I pressed it. The room shifted. It wasn't like the floor trembled or the walls cracked. It was subtle, like the air had thickened, vibrating quietly, the way it does right before a storm. My heart raced, but I didn't stop. A soft hum filled the room, growing louder until suddenly the edges of the blanket lifted, floating as if it weighed nothing. "Okay, this is new," I whispered, my voice barely steady. And then the walls started to fade, not disappear. Fade, like fog rolling in, soft and slow, blurring everything out. My bed, my shelves, even the old clock on the wall dissolved into a soft, swirling mist. I wasn't scared, not really. It felt right, like this was supposed to happen. "Where are we going?" I asked the empty air, feeling stupid for talking to a blanket. But then the blanket twitched, actually twitched, like it had heard me. Before I could process that, the mist cleared, and I wasn't in my room anymore. I was standing in the middle of a vast meadow, under a sky so dark and full of stars, it felt endless. A soft wind brushed past me, carrying the scent of pine and something sweeter, like honey and wildflowers. The blanket, still wrapped loosely around my shoulders, shimmered faintly under the moonlight, and then I heard it, a voice, soft but clear, floating through the air. "You finally found it." I spun around. There, just beyond the edge of the meadow, stood a figure, tall, hooded, motionless. "Found what?" I called out, my voice cracking slightly. The figure didn't move, but spoke again, the voice deeper this time. "The key." I looked down at the blanket, its edges now embroidered with symbols I couldn't recognize, glowing faintly. "This?" I asked, but before I could get an answer, the ground beneath my feet shifted, the meadow rippling like water, and I felt myself falling, slow, weightless, like drifting into sleep. Everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't lying in my bed, nor was I still in the meadow. Instead, I found myself inside what looked like an enormous library, walls stretching high above, shelves crammed with dusty books, scrolls, and strange trinkets. The ceiling was a glass dome, revealing the same starry sky I had just seen, but now the constellations twisted and shifted like they were alive, drawing unfamiliar patterns. The blanket was still around my shoulders, now heavier, as if it was carrying the weight of the journey we just made. Its edges flickered with that same soft glow, the symbols on it rearranging themselves, like they were thinking. "Where am I?" I whispered into the hollow space. A book on a nearby shelf slid out and floated towards me, its worn leather cover creaking as it opened on its own. Pages flipped rapidly before stopping on a single line, inked in deep crimson. "The chosen finds the path, but the path finds its own end." I didn't like the sound of that. "Chosen for what?" I muttered, but before I could blink, the hooded figure from the meadow appeared, this time closer, clearer. His hood had fallen back, revealing sharp features, silver-streaked hair, and eyes that glowed faintly gold. "You weren't supposed to press the button," he said, voice low, but not angry, more resigned. "Well, I did," I shot back, feeling a weird mix of fear and defiance. "So, now what?" He tilted his head, studying me. "Now, you've tied yourself to it." I followed his gaze down to the blanket. The symbols had stopped moving. In the center, one stood out, a small spiral-shaped mark, now glowing brighter than the others. "Every century," he continued, "someone wakes the blanket. It chooses who gets to finish what was left undone." "I didn't choose anything," I snapped, though my heart was racing. "You did the moment you pressed the button," he replied calmly. The walls of the library started to tremble, books shaking in their places as an unseen force pushed against the space around us. "You need to leave," he said quickly, his golden eyes flashing with urgency. "It's found you." "It? What's it?" But before he could answer, a loud, metallic groan echoed through the library. The air grew cold, frost creeping up the shelves. The dome above cracked down the middle, shards of glass hovering midair before floating upward, as if gravity had reversed. "Run!" he barked, thrusting a heavy iron key into my hand. I had no time to question it. I clutched the key, yanked the blanket tighter around me, and sprinted through the rows of towering shelves. The ground behind me began to vanish, bookshelves crumbling into dust, the cold force swallowing everything in its path. As I ran, the symbols on the blanket flared again, pulling me toward a massive, arched door at the far end of the library. I shoved the key into the lock, twisted it, and the door swung open, revealing not another room, but a black void, speckled with pinpricks of light. I didn't hesitate. I jumped. For a moment, there was nothing but the sensation of falling, fast, endless, cold. Then I landed hard on something soft. I sat up, heart pounding. I was back in my room. Or was I? The walls looked the same. My shelves, my clock. But there was an unsettling silence. No street lamp glow filtered through the curtains. The window was gone. In its place was a wall covered in strange symbols, the same ones from the blanket, etched deep into the wood. I stood up slowly, the blanket now lying motionless on the bed. And then I heard it, a soft whisper, coming from the dark corner of the room. "You think you're back, but you've only just started." Next, the whisper echoed through the room, soft but heavy, as if it was coming from deep within the walls. My breath caught in my throat, my hand instinctively clutching the blanket beside me. It felt cold now, lifeless, its glowing symbols darkened into dull, threadbare patterns. I turned toward the corner, the shadows bending unnaturally, curling along the walls like smoke. "Who's there?" My voice cracked despite my effort to sound steady. The darkness stirred. Out of it stepped a girl, maybe my age, wrapped in a cloak that shimmered like water under moonlight. Her eyes were pale silver, reflecting the dim light of the room, and in her hand she held a piece of the same blanket I had, torn at the edges, but undeniably part of it. "You made it further than I did," she said, her voice a soft mix of relief and regret. Who are you?" I stammered. "I was the last one the blanket chose," she replied, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. 60 years ago." The weight of her words hit me like a brick. 60? What? How are you still here?" "This place, it traps you if you don't finish the path," she said, her voice trembling slightly now. I got stuck. The last door closed before I could escape. Before I could fully process what she was saying, the symbols on the wall began to glow, brighter and faster this time, pulsing like a frantic heartbeat. The room shook, books falling from shelves, the ground vibrating beneath my feet. "You don't have much time," she hissed. "The keeper, he followed you here." "The hooded guy?" I asked, though I already knew the answer was no. She shook her head violently. "Number." That was the guardian. He was trying to help. The keeper. He's the one who cursed the blanket, the one who feeds on the ones it traps. A cold breeze washed through the room, and I felt it. Something ancient, something heavy, crawling into the space with us. "Then how do I finish this?" I asked desperately. She hesitated, then held out her fragment of the blanket. "You need all the pieces. The blanket was torn when the first traveler failed. Find the others. Complete it." The walls around us cracked, long deep lines stretching across the wood like spiderwebs. But where? Before I could finish, a massive shadow lunged from the wall, faster than anything I could react to. It wrapped around the girl, pulling her into the darkness. Her scream cut through the air, sharp and sudden, before it vanished, like it had been snatched out of existence. "No!" I bolted toward where she'd stood, but there was nothing, just a cold patch of floor and the piece of the blanket she'd dropped. I grabbed it. The moment my fingers touched the fabric, the room split open beneath me, like the floor itself had peeled away, and I was falling again, deeper this time. The cold air tore past me, shapes and symbols rushing by in a blur before I slammed into solid ground. I was in another place, a towering stone hall stretched out before me, torches burning low on the walls, their flames flickering blue. The fragment I'd just picked up had merged with the blanket, now heavier in my arms, its symbols glowing once more. I stood up slowly, my heart racing, when I noticed them. Faint footprints in the dust-covered floor, leading deeper into the hall. But they weren't alone. Parallel to them were claw marks. Deep, fresh. Somewhere, far off in the endless dark, I heard the faintest sound, a dragging noise, slow and deliberate. It was coming for me, but something inside me shifted then. I wasn't just prey in this twisted game. I was part of the story now. I gripped the blanket tighter, following the footprints, knowing the keeper was somewhere close, waiting, but I wasn't about to give him what he wanted. Not yet. Next, the hall stretched on, a winding path of stone and shadow, each step echoing into the vast emptiness around me. The dragging sound grew louder, closer, its sharp rhythm vibrating through the floor. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but something about the footprints, those deliberate steps, pulled me forward. I followed them deeper until I reached a fork in the hall. One path led into a narrow, torch-lit tunnel, while the other descended into darkness, the ground wet and uneven. The footprints split too, Two sets now, one heading down the tunnel, the other into the dark. Of course, I muttered, because this wasn't hard enough. The dragging sound hit again, this time so close I felt the air shift. Without thinking, I dove into the tunnel. The walls pressed in as I ran, rough stone brushing against my shoulders. The air grew warmer here, thick with dust and something metallic. Blood, maybe. My pulse roared in my ears until the tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber. In its center stood a pedestal, and on it, another fragment of the blanket, but it wasn't unguarded. Coiled around the pedestal was a massive serpent-like creature, its obsidian scales gleaming under the torchlight, twin eyes glowing gold. Its body pulsed with slow, deliberate breaths, as if it was waiting, watching. The keeper wasn't here, but this thing, it was his gatekeeper. I edged forward, each step sinking into the thick dust covering the floor. The blanket in my arms grew warmer, its symbols flaring to life again, casting swirling patterns onto the cavern walls. The serpent stirred, its eyes locking onto me. "You carry the curse," it hissed, voice slithering through the air. "I'm not here to play its game," I replied, though my voice trembled. "It doesn't matter what you want." The serpent coiled tighter around the pedestal. "Only that the path ends here, or continues, if you're willing to risk it." The serpent flicked its tail, revealing a key hanging from one of its scales, a shimmering silver, identical to the one the guardian had given me earlier. "Another key," I whispered. "Another door," it replied. I clenched my jaw. Every part of me screamed to turn back, but the blanket pulsed against my arms, its glow intensifying. "Then I'm taking it." In a single reckless move, I lunged for the pedestal. The serpent struck. I ducked, its jaw snapping shut inches from my head, its breath hot and acrid. I twisted around, the blanket flaring like wings as it wrapped around my arm. I used it as a shield, its enchanted fabric catching the serpent's next strike, the force sending me sprawling against the cavern wall. But the moment its fangs hit the blanket, something unexpected happened. The serpent shrieked, its body convulsing violently. The symbols on the blanket spread like cracks through its scales, burning bright blue. I scrambled to my feet, seized the key, and yanked the blanket back before the serpent could recover. Its shriek echoed one last time before it dissolved into a swirl of ash. Breathing hard, I grabbed the fragment from the pedestal. The moment I touched it, the cavern began to shake violently, stone splintering, dust falling like heavy snow. I wasn't waiting around for it to collapse. The blanket, now nearly whole, tugged at me, guiding me toward a jagged crack in the far wall. I ducked through it, key in hand, into a narrow passage that twisted upward. As I climbed, the air grew colder again, that now familiar energy thick in the air. I emerged into a vast hall, unlike anything I'd seen yet. Floating in the center was a door, massive, ancient, its surface covered in the same symbols as the blanket. But this door had a crack running through it, like it had been damaged from the inside. Beneath it, bound in chains that glowed with pulsing light, was the guardian. He looked up at me, golden eyes dimmed, his voice barely a whisper. "You weren't supposed to make it this far." "What happened?" I gasped, rushing forward. "The keeper broke the path. He fractured it. That door." He motioned weakly. "It's the only way out, but it's guarded." "By what?" I hesitated, then said, "By the first traveler, the one who failed." Before I could respond, A deep growl echoed from behind the door, followed by a heavy thud, something massive moving. "Free me," the guardian rasped, "or face him alone." But before I could make a choice, the door creaked open a sliver, and from the darkness beyond, something stepped through. A figure, tall, wrapped in a cloak made of the same cursed fabric as the blanket. But what froze me in place wasn't his presence. It was his face. It was me. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. There he stood. I stood, only older, worn, like life itself had been drained out piece by piece. His eyes, hollow, yet burning with a strange light, locked onto mine. The weight of his presence was suffocating, as though every inch of the hall bent under his existence. What is this?" I gasped. The older version of me didn't speak. He tilted his head, the same way I did when I was trying to solve a puzzle, and then his voice, my voice, rippled through the air, low and hollow. I failed, and now I'm trapped in the loop you just stepped into. The guardian, still chained beneath the floating door, groaned. He's not just a reflection. He's what you become if you don't break the cycle. The older me took a step forward. The cursed blanket draped over his shoulders, now fused into his very skin, its symbols carved deep like scars. I tried to fix this, tried to piece the blanket together, but the keeper's path, it always bends back. I felt the fragment I'd picked up grow cold in my hands, the patterns flickering erratically. But I made it further, I insisted, holding the nearly complete blanket toward him. "I have the key. This time it's different." He chuckled bitterly. That's what I thought too. Another thunderous thud vibrated through the hall. From the widening crack in the door, a shadowy claw clawed through, curling along the edges. The keeper was coming. The guardian struggled against his chains. There is a way out, but only if you complete the blanket and sever the link. "What link?" I snapped. The guardian's eyes darkened. "Him." He gestured weakly toward the older me. I flinched. The older me smiled, a sad, broken thing. "But if you cut me out, you cut out everything. The knowledge, the path, the strength you'll need to finish this. Or," the guardian rasped, "you take the risk. Burn the cycle. Start clean." The hall split again with another violent shake. The keeper's claw slammed down near the floating door, cracking the stone, sending shockwaves through the chamber. I had seconds. I looked between the two of them, my older self, offering the chance of certainty, but also a future locked in this twisted maze, and the guardian, telling me to sever the past and face the unknown. The key in my hand burned hotter. "Make your choice," the guardian hissed. The older me extended a hand. "Or don't, and watch it all collapse." My mind raced. Then, with a sharp breath, I spun, drove the key into the ground, and slammed the blanket over it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the hall exploded with light. The older me screamed, no, echoed, his form unraveling into threads of the cursed fabric, the twisted symbols peeling away into the air. The chains binding the guardian shattered, the metal fragments floating upward before dissolving. The floating door groaned open wider, but so did the crack in its surface. And from that crack, the keeper emerged fully. His form wasn't like anything I expected. No hooded figure, no monstrous clawed beast. He was a shadow with no edges, a void that swallowed the light around him. But at his core pulsed a single, burning eye. "You broke the loop," he growled, the ground splintering beneath him. "But you haven't escaped." The guardian shoved me backward. "Run, finish this." But I didn't run. I gripped the nearly whole blanket, now glowing so fiercely it pulsed like a heartbeat, and hurled it toward the keeper. The fabric wrapped around him instantly, the ancient symbols igniting in violent blue flames. He roared, the sound shaking the very air, but the blanket constricted tighter, binding his form. But the force was pulling me, too. The keeper's eye locked onto mine as he was dragged back toward the crumbling door. And in the last moment, he spat out a final warning. Cycles never truly end. They only restart. Then he was gone. The chamber cracked apart, the door exploding into shards of golden light. I landed hard, this time, truly back in my room. The blanket lay beside me, whole at last, its glow fading into soft silver. Everything was still. But on my wall, where the crack had once been, there was now a faint outline, like a door that hadn't fully closed. And just before I drifted into sleep, I thought I heard it, a soft whisper. You'll be needed again. Soon. I woke up to silence, deep, unsettling silence, the kind that feels too thick, like the air itself is waiting for something. My room was still the same, the shelves cluttered with books, the old clock ticking softly on the wall, and the blanket folded neatly at the edge of my bed. Except I never folded it. I sat up slowly, my fingers brushing over the fabric. It was cold, colder than before, and the intricate symbols stitched into it were now barely visible, faded like they'd been there for centuries. But that wasn't what caught my eye. It was the faint outline on my wall, the door shape still there, only now it had deepened, its lines glowing faintly, as if the barrier between worlds was thinner than ever. I stood, heart thudding, and approached it. When I pressed my palm against the cold surface, the symbols from the blanket flickered to life beneath my touch. Then came the knock. 1, 2, 3. Slow, deliberate. I staggered backward, the sound echoing through the room. My mind raced. Had the keeper returned? Or was this another part of the cycle? Before I could decide, the door began to peel away, the glow intensifying until the shape of a figure materialized in its frame. But it wasn't the keeper. It was the girl, the one from before, the one who'd been dragged into the shadows. But something was wrong. Her eyes, once silver and soft, now glowed a deep crimson, and the piece of the blanket she'd once held was gone, replaced by dark chains wrapping around her wrists. You left me there, she whispered, her voice fractured, distorted, layered with something inhuman. I tried to help, I stammered. She smiled, but it wasn't kind. And now I'm his. With that, the faint glow of the door exploded outward, flinging me across the room. The impact knocked the breath out of me, my head spinning as I struggled to my feet. The girl, or what she had become, stepped through fully now, the chains dragging behind her, scraping against the floor with a sound that crawled under my skin. I thought I escaped him, she murmured, her voice warping. But the keeper, he needed someone else, a replacement. Realization slammed into me. He made you the new keeper, I breathed. Her expression twisted into something between sorrow and rage. I didn't have a choice, but you do. The walls of my room began to warp, the ceiling stretching higher, the furniture dissolving into mist. We weren't in my room anymore. We were somewhere in between. Break the blanket, she said, voice cracking, or this cycle will never end. But if I do, I started. You'll lose everything, she cut in. The path, the knowledge, all of it. But the keeper will be gone. I hesitated. The weight of it hit me. Either destroy the blanket and sever the connection forever, or keep it intact and risk the cycle restarting. Or, she added, voice softer now, you could take his place. A cold shiver ran through me. What? You're stronger than I was. Stronger than him. Take control. Be the one who decides when this ends. The chains around her wrists shifted, and in a flash, she hurled the iron key, the very one I thought I had left behind, toward me. It landed at my feet, glinting with a soft, cold light. Choose, she whispered. I bent down, fingers brushing the key, but in that moment, the blanket at my feet twitched, alive again, and the symbols flared violently. In the reflection of the key's polished surface, I didn't see myself. I saw the keeper's burning eye, still here, still watching. Cycles never truly end, I muttered, remembering his last words. I had seconds. Either break the blanket or take the mantle. But what if there was a third option? I glanced at the chains binding her, at the key in my hand, then at the living, breathing fabric of the blanket. A wild, reckless idea sparked in my mind. Maybe I can end this and save you, I whispered. I jammed the key not into the blanket or the door, but into the chain wrapped around her wrist. The metal screamed as it snapped, the energy around us spiraling violently. She gasped, collapsing to her knees, the red glow in her eyes fading, replaced by silver once more. But the world was unraveling now, torn between collapse and rebirth. The walls folded in on themselves. The ground cracked wide, and just before everything went dark, the last thing I heard was her voice. You changed it. I opened my eyes. A calm breeze brushed past me. I wasn't in my room. I was back in the meadow, the one from the very beginning. Only now it was dawn. The sky painted soft oranges and pinks. The blanket was gone, but in its place, the key sat in my hand, warm and heavy. And in the distance, by the edge of the trees, the girl stood. No chains, no curse, just free. She raised her hand in a wave, her smile soft this time, but something still tugged at me, deep in my chest. When I turned around, I saw it, another door, but this time it wasn't cracked. It was wide open, waiting. The cycle hadn't ended. I had simply moved to the next layer, and somehow I knew. The keeper was still out there. I stood there, the key heavy in my hand, the breeze brushing past me like a soft warning. The door ahead loomed tall and ancient, its dark frame humming with energy, pulling me toward it. Its surface rippled like water, reflecting fragments of places I didn't recognize. Towering forests under violet skies, cities floating in the clouds, vast oceans that glow beneath twin moons. Yet deep within those reflections, I caught fleeting glimpses of something else. Him, the keeper, watching, waiting. The girl was gone. The meadow was eerily still. Only the door remained. This is it, I thought. One more step. But then the ground beneath my feet trembled. A deep, guttural rumble, and from the rippling surface of the door, something clawed its way out. At first, I thought it was the keeper. But no, this figure was smaller, more fragile. A boy, maybe 10 or 11, wearing a tattered hoodie, his hands clutching something tight to his chest, a piece of the blanket frayed at the edges. He stumbled forward and collapsed at my feet. Help, he's coming, the boy gasped, his voice barely more than a whisper. I crouched beside him. Who are you? He looked up, his eyes wide with terror. Another traveler. I didn't finish the path. I tried, but he caught me. Before I could respond, the boy's grip tightened on the blanket piece. It twitched, alive, just like before. But this time, it didn't glow with that soft blue light. It bled, dark, inky tendrils seeped from the fabric, writhing like veins, snaking across the grass toward the door. "Drop it," I shouted, but the boy shook his head. "I can't. It's part of me now." The tendrils lunged, wrapping around the boy's arms and legs, yanking him backward toward the door. I dove, grabbing his wrist, but the pull was too strong. The door's surface expanded, the watery reflection turning black as a single, burning eye emerged from its center. The keeper. He hadn't been out there, waiting in some far-off world. He'd been inside the door this whole time. I yanked the key from my belt, and with every bit of strength I had, stabbed it into the ground between me and the door. Instantly, a blinding circle of light exploded outward, slicing through the tendrils, freeing the boy. He gasped for air, but the door roared in fury, the keeper's shadowy form beginning to seep through the frame. The boy scrambled to his feet, his face pale. "He's breaking through. You can't stop him now." But as the tendrils writhed and clawed at the protective circle, another memory surfaced in my mind. Something the guardian had said before I freed him. Cycles only break when you stop playing by the rules. I realized then, every traveler who'd failed had tried to complete the blanket, close the doors, follow the path, and that's exactly what the keeper wanted. "Forget the path," I muttered. "What?" the boy gasped. I grabbed the torn piece of the blanket from his hands and ripped it down the center. The inky tendrils shrieked, recoiling instantly. The keeper's eye narrowed in rage, but the ripple in the door deepened, distorting its structure. If I could unravel it all, tear the very fabric of the blanket apart, I could collapse the whole cycle. But there was a cost. I hesitated, the finality of it sinking in. If I destroyed it completely, there'd be no way back. My room, my life, gone. The boy tugged on my sleeve. "It's worth it, for all of us still trapped." His words anchored me. Without another thought, I gripped the entire blanket, its full, cursed fabric, and pulled. The seam split. Light burst from the cracks. The door howled, its surface imploding inward, dragging the keeper's shadow with it. The sky fractured above, the meadow splitting apart like paper burning from the edges. But before it all vanished, I heard the keeper's voice one last time. "You think this is the end?" It growled softer now. "There's always another door." Then everything went white. I woke up lying in bed. For a moment, it felt normal. The smell of rain through the cracked window. The distant hum of cars on the street. But then I noticed it. The key was still on my nightstand, and on the wall, in the exact spot where the outline of the door had been, a new mark shimmered faintly. A spiral. Endless. The cycle wasn't broken. It had just evolved. And deep down, I knew the keeper hadn't lost. He'd changed the game, and I was still playing. The spiral on the wall pulsed softly, a faint glow that seemed to sync with my heartbeat. Slow, steady, deliberate. I sat up, the key cold in my palm, its edges sharper than I remembered. The room felt off. The air was thicker, heavier, as though I was submerged beneath invisible layers. I approached the wall, fingers hovering just above the glowing spiral. "Don't!" The voice shot through the room like a bullet. I spun around. Standing in the doorway was the guardian, no longer bound, no longer weary. But something about him had changed. His golden eyes flickered with shades of crimson now, and the air around him twisted ever so slightly. "You survived," I breathed. He nodded, but there was no relief in his expression. "You weren't supposed to." I blinked. "What?" The cycle didn't end. It fractured. And now, The lines between the paths are breaking. He gestured to the spiral, its glow deepening. That's not the door you think it is. Before I could speak, the spiral pulsed again, faster this time, and the wall peeled away, not like paper, but like skin. Beyond it wasn't another meadow or twisted library. It was my street. I could see my house, the old oak tree in the front yard, the flickering streetlight that always shorted out when it rained. But there was something wrong. The world outside was still. Every car, every leaf, even the raindrops mid-fall, frozen in place, locked in some kind of temporal stasis. You brought part of the cycle back with you, the guardian said grimly. The barrier between the paths in your world is breaking down. The ground trembled beneath my feet, a low hum vibrating through the floorboards. But we beat the keeper, I argued. The door collapsed. He's gone. The guardian's jaw tightened. You still don't get it. The keeper wasn't the core of the cycle. You are. The words hit like a freight train. You've carried the blanket, used the key, walked through the doors. You've been absorbing the cycle into yourself this whole time. As if to prove his point, the key in my hand began to glow, not with the soft silver light I'd seen before, but a deep, violent red. And now? I asked, my throat dry. Now, he said, the cycle isn't hunting you. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. You're becoming the new keeper. The spiral flared violently, and with a deafening crack, the barrier shattered. The frozen world outside snapped into motion, but it wasn't the world I knew. Shadows slithered across the streets, their forms stretched and fragmented, as though they weren't fully real. Above, the sky twisted into swirling storms of black and crimson, constellations bending into unnatural shapes. And standing beneath the oak tree was the girl, her silver eyes locked onto mine, but there was no relief there, no smile. She raised her hand, revealing a jagged shard of the blanket, dark, splintered. He's still here, she mouthed, and before I could process it, the ground beneath her buckled, and something, a towering formless mass, rose behind her, its tendrils spiraling outward, merging with the twisted clouds above. The keeper, or maybe something worse. The guardian grabbed my shoulder. The blanket's destruction didn't kill him. It just freed him from the cycle. So what now? I asked, panic thick in my throat. He hesitated. There's only one way to stop this. You have to take his place. I reeled. You told me to break the cycle. And you did. His voice was heavy. But cycles don't just vanish. They need a new anchor. And right now, you're it. The ground split open behind us, spirals of dark energy twisting upward. But then I remembered the girl, the shard of the blanket in her hand. Unless, I started, my mind racing. The guardian's gaze darkened. Don't even think about it. But it was too late. I bolted through the shattered wall, the key clutched tight in my hand, running straight for the girl. The tendrils lashed out, clawing at the ground around me, ripping up concrete and dirt. But I ducked and weaved, the key glowing brighter with every step. The girl saw me coming and threw the shard. I caught it midair. The moment my fingers touched it, the air warped. Memories, not mine, rushed into my mind. Faces, names, all the past travelers who had failed. Their fear, their hope, and their mistakes. The shard merged with the key in a flash of light, the fusion creating something new. Not a key, not a fragment, a lock. The keeper roared, a bone-deep sound that cracked the air around us. I turned to the girl. We end this together. She nodded, gripping my arm, as the storm above churned into a spiraling vortex. We hurled the lock into the heart of the storm. There was a pause, then a detonation of light. The world convulsed. The keeper's form twisted and splintered, the tendrils writhing as they were dragged into the collapsing spiral. The ground buckled beneath me, gravity losing all meaning as I felt myself lifted upward. The last thing I heard was the girl's voice, calm and steady. "You did it." I woke up in my room again. This time, there were no symbols on the wall, no key on the nightstand, but something gnawed at me, a quiet emptiness, like a piece of me had been torn away. I stood, looking around. Everything was normal, until I noticed the soft hum. I turned to the mirror, and in the reflection, in the depths of my own eyes, the spiral still turned. The spiral in my reflection pulsed, slow and rhythmic, as though it were alive, breathing within me. My fingers trembled as I reached toward the mirror, half expecting it to ripple like the doorways before. But this time, the glass stayed cold, solid. Yet, deep within the reflection, something shifted. My reflection blinked, but I hadn't. I staggered back, my heart hammering in my chest. "Not again," I muttered. But then the reflection smiled. Not my smile. Something twisted, hungry. Before I could react, a sharp knock echoed through the room. 1, 2, 3. The same rhythm. The keeper's rhythm. I spun toward the door, the normal wooden one leading out to the hallway. Everything in me screamed not to open it, but the knocking came again, louder this time, the sound vibrating through the floorboards. 1, 2, 3. Against my better judgment, I reached for the handle and pulled. Nothing was there. The hallway stretched out, dark and silent. But when I turned back toward my room, it was gone. I stood in an endless corridor, hundreds, no, thousands of doors lining the walls, each one marked with a faint spiral. Some were cracked open, shadows slipping through the gaps. Others pulsed with a dim light, as if waiting for someone to pass through. "Welcome back," a voice murmured. The guardian stepped out from one of the doorways, though he looked different now, older, wearier. His eyes flickered with something close to regret. "I thought it was over," I said, my voice hollow. He chuckled darkly. "Cycles never end. They just change shape." I clenched my fists. Then why am I still here? Why didn't the lock work? "The lock didn't destroy the cycle," he explained. "It sealed the keeper, inside you." The words hit like a freight train. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. "That spiral, in my eyes." He nodded grimly. "It's him, or what's left of him. You're the anchor now." "No," I whispered. "No, I fought this. I broke it." "You tried," the guardian said, "but you became part of it the moment you picked up that blanket. You're not the traveler anymore. You're the path." The weight of it sank in. Every choice I'd made, every door I'd opened. I hadn't been escaping the cycle. I had been building it. The corridor around us shifted, the doors rearranging themselves, the spirals glowing brighter. "But there's still one way out," the guardian said, his voice softer now. I hesitated. "What is it?" "You open the final door." He pointed to the very end of the corridor, where a single towering door stood apart from the rest. Its surface was black as obsidian, the spiral on it etched deep, glowing a violent crimson. "And what's behind it?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, the guardian handed me something. The key. But it wasn't metal anymore. It pulsed like a living thing, its edges jagged, as if it had been broken and reforged. "Whatever's in there," he said, It's been waiting. I felt the pull again, that same gravitational force that had been guiding me since the beginning. The key grew heavier in my palm. I walked toward the door, the corridor warping with each step, the other doors bending away as though afraid. When I reached the final door, I hesitated. "Once you open this," the guardian warned, "there's no coming back." I slid the key into the lock. The spiral on the door twisted violently, and then the door opened. Inside was nothing. A vast, empty void stretched out in all directions. But then, floating in the center, was a single object. The blanket, whole, untouched. But this time, it wasn't glowing. It was dormant, waiting. I stepped inside, the darkness swallowing me, the ground vanishing beneath my feet. Gravity lost all meaning as I drifted toward the blanket. "Why is it here?" I whispered. A voice answered, familiar, but fractured. "Because you made it." It was me, or the version of me that had failed before. The one I'd seen beneath the floating door, the older version with hollow eyes. But now, his face was clearer, realer. "You'd never escape the cycle," he continued. "You've just been running in circles, and every time you win, the spiral tightens." He gestured to the blanket. "But now, you can finish it, one way or another." I hovered there, the key in one hand, the blanket within reach. "End it," he whispered, but something in me hesitated. "What happens if I don't?" I asked. The older me blinked. "Then the cycle resets." "And if I do?" His eyes darkened. "You become what the keeper was. Two choices, neither good." But then, in the void, I noticed something. Another spiral, smaller, hidden beneath the folds of the blanket. But this one spun in reverse, an inverse cycle, a third option. I grabbed the blanket and flipped it over. The spiral unraveled. The void screamed. Everything bent inward. And then I woke up, but not in my room. I was lying in a meadow again. Only this time, the sky above was empty. No stars, no moons. The blanket was gone. The key was gone. But the spiral? It was still there, carved deep into the ground beneath me. Only now, it wasn't spinning. It was waiting. I sat up in the empty meadow, the sky above stretching into a pale, endless void. No sun, no stars, just a hollow grayness that felt unfinished. The spiral beneath me, once alive with its rhythmic pulse, now lay dormant, etched into the earth like a scar. But it wasn't gone. It was waiting. The realization sent a chill through me. I had unraveled the spiral, flipped it, even broken the cycle. Yet here it was, silent, patient. I stood, brushing the dirt off my hands, and the ground beneath the spiral trembled, just slightly, enough to let me know it felt me. "Not done yet, huh?" I muttered. A soft breeze swept through the meadow, carrying with it a sound, faint, distorted, almost like whispers. I strained to listen, and the words sharpened just for a second. Not the first, not the last. The wind shifted again, and the spiral flickered beneath my feet, like a heartbeat restarting. Then, without warning, a jagged tear split the air above the spiral. Not a door this time. Something raw, like the fabric of the world itself, was ripping apart. Beyond the tear, I glimpsed shadows, moving in a vast, swirling storm. And from the fracture, something fell. It hit the ground with a heavy thud. A book. I approached it cautiously, its blackened leather cover scarred with claw marks. The title burned into the cover in crimson letters, "The Keepers Before." My throat tightened. I opened it. Pages flipped on their own, faster than I could read, until it landed on a single entry, an illustration of the spiral, identical to the one beneath my feet, surrounded by dozens of names, some scratched out, others still legible. My eyes scanned the list until I found it. My name, written at the very end. I swallowed hard, but before I could turn the page, a thick drop of ink bled through from the next one, splattering onto my name, smearing it. I flipped the page and froze. There, written in jagged ink, was another name. The True Keeper. No signature, no description, just the title. But beneath it, scrawled hastily, was a single line. The Keeper was never one. It was many, waiting for the one who would bind them all. I dropped the book. The spiral beneath me ignited, deep crimson light searing through the earth. The meadow split apart in jagged fractures, each crack spiraling outward. Shapes clawed their way through, figures, some familiar, others monstrous. The guardian, the girl, even the twisted version of myself I thought I had destroyed. But they weren't whole. They flickered like broken memories, fragmented and raw. You didn't break the cycle. The guardian's voice echoed around me, hollow now. You merged them. The shadows lunged forward, circling me. The spiral throbbed beneath my feet, demanding something. An action, a choice. And then the sky split again. Through the widening tear, I saw dozens of other spirals, some dormant, some spinning violently, each one with a different figure at its center. Travelers, all of them trapped in their own cycles. And at the core of it all, threading through each spiral, was a single glowing line, binding them together. It wasn't about breaking the cycle. It was about severing the connection. I gripped the book again, its pages now burning hot, and ripped it in half. The spirals above convulsed, the glowing thread snapping violently. The shadows surrounding me screamed, their forms disintegrating into dust. But the spiral beneath me, it didn't collapse. It grew. It spread across the entire meadow, over the hills, the sky, until I stood in the center of an endless spiral, my body floating above its core. You're the last link, the guardian's voice whispered. Then I'll break it, I growled. But deep within the spiral, I felt it. A heartbeat, not mine, not the keeper's, something older. The ground trembled as the core of the spiral cracked open, revealing a swirling abyss beneath. A shape began to rise. Tall, massive, its body a living version of the spiral, its limbs twisting in impossible angles. The first keeper, the origin of it all. You can't destroy me, its voice thundered. You're built from me. The key reappeared in my hand, only now it wasn't a key at all. It was a mirror. I lifted it, and in the reflection, I didn't see myself. I saw the first keeper's face. I was the origin. Every cycle, every door, every traveler. It had all been me, fragmented across endless paths, each choice spawning another spiral. This ends now, I said, turning the mirror toward the spiral. The reflection hit the core. The spiral convulsed, but instead of shattering, it bent inward, folding in on itself, collapsing into a single point of light. And then, darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my room. No spirals, no key, no blanket, but on my desk sat the torn book, now blank inside. And on the window, written in the condensation, cycles end, but echoes remain. I closed the book, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Somewhere, in some layer of reality, the spiral was still spinning, waiting. For days, I pretended it was over. I woke up to the soft hum of the city outside my window, the same flickering streetlight across the road, the smell of rain still lingering in the air. School books were stacked on my desk. My phone buzzed with unread messages, and my reflection in the mirror finally looked normal. But the feeling never left, like something was still watching. still waiting. The torn book sat untouched on my desk, its blank pages an open wound. Every night, I found myself glancing at it, wondering if a word, a symbol, anything would reappear. But it didn't, until the 7th night. I woke up to the sound of pages flipping. The book was open. Ink bled through the pages, slow and deliberate, forming a single sentence. The spiral isn't a path. It's a seed. I felt my heart race, my hand shaking as I slammed the book shut. But the damage was done. The message was there. It had always been there. I stared at the condensation on the window, half expecting more words to form, but there was nothing. The quiet stretched thin until I noticed it. The mirror. It was fogged up, despite the room being cold. Slowly, words etched themselves onto its surface. It's growing. I didn't need to ask what it was. The spiral, the cycle, the echo. Even if I'd shattered the path, severed the lines, something deeper had taken root. Something older than the keepers, older than the spirals themselves. A force that didn't just want to trap me in the cycle. It wanted to spread. I opened the book again. New ink had spread across the page. A map, not of places, of people. Tiny spirals dotted the page, each one connected by thin, fraying threads. And my name, it sat dead center. But there was one thread, only one, that led away from me, away from the spirals, an exit, one I hadn't seen before. There's still time, I muttered. The house creaked, the air heavy, as though the very walls were listening. I grabbed the book, shoved it into my bag, and slipped out into the night. The air was thick, the clouds swirling above, heavy with a storm that hadn't quite broken yet. The map glowed faintly from within the bag, guiding me through empty streets, down forgotten alleys, until I stood before a door. Old, wooden, no spiral this time, but a single keyhole, and in my hand the mirror had shifted. It was a key again. I hesitated, every instinct screaming that this wasn't just the end of the cycle. It was the end of me. But then I thought of the girl, the guardian, the countless travelers who had been lost to this twisted web of spirals. I slipped the key into the lock, turned it. The door swung open, revealing nothing but darkness. But this time, I didn't fall. I stepped through. I don't know how long I wandered in the dark. There was no ground, no walls, just the feeling of movement, as though the darkness itself was carrying me somewhere. Then, a faint light ahead. I moved toward it, each step pulling something heavy from my chest, like I was shedding layers I didn't know I had. The light grew, and then I was standing in a field, bright, alive. The sky above was clear, stretching endlessly in every direction. There were no spirals here, no doors, just peace. I sat down in the grass, feeling the sun on my face for the first time in what felt like forever. I thought it was over, but then a soft breeze stirred the grass, and I saw it. A spiral, not carved into the earth this time, but growing. Petals of a wildflower blooming in a perfect, spiraling pattern. I laughed, soft and bitter. Some things never truly end. They just change. I stood, the book still heavy in my bag. I could bury it, burn it, but instead I left it there, beside the wildflower, because someone else might need it, or maybe someone else already had. And as I walked away, the breeze carried one last whisper, and that was the magic blanket. If you enjoyed this journey through spirals, cycles, and twists you didn't see coming, don't forget to like this video to show your love. Drop a comment below and let me know, what would you have done if you found the magic blanket? And if you want more stories that help you relax, drift off or just escape into a different world, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell icon so you never miss another dreamy adventure. Share this video with someone who needs a little magic in their life. Until next time, stay cozy, stay curious, and sweet dreams. See you in the next sleepy story.